Well, hey, it's Matt Steen, co-founder of Chemistry Staffing, and this is another chemistry conversation. And today I am joined by Dave Travis. So Dave is the Director of Strategic Counsel to Pastors and Church Boards at Generis. Does a lot of great work, just kind of walking alongside churches as they look to figure out what does their next 15 years look like, help them kind of think through succession planning, a little bit of that, and working with church or with pastors to help them kind of think about what the season ahead looks like for them. Just put together a phenomenal resource. It's the Pastor Legacy Life Plan, which he tells me he's giving away for free, which is nuts, Dave. Can't be sustainable, but thank you for making that resource available to churches. But Dave, thanks for taking some time to talk.
Yeah, in fact, if people do want that little booklet, they just need to email me at dave.travis@generis, GENERIS.com, and I'll if you're US based, we'll ship you one out. Don't want to be shipping them overseas just yet. And we are going to have a digital version sometime next year, but it is a paper copy. You can read it in about 45 minutes.
Yeah. It's a great resource. I think every pastor needs to be reading through this now.
Thank you.
I hope you have a warehouse full. So
we have boxes.
So Dave, you've been a student of the church for years, and I've always valued what you see in the church space. Man, it's been, I think we were just talking, it's a weird time to be serving in church. It's a weird time to be working with churches, because everything that we used to think was being just a given has started to change. So what are you learning, man? What are you seeing? What are you learning?
So I think in terms of buckets, and it's just, typing and categorizing things. And if people read my newsletter, Church Leader Insider, you'll see I'm big on, setting up 4 quadrants for everything. But one of the things I see here right now, and let's call it 3 buckets as we look at churches and church leaders. And I get to talk to about 20 or 30 pastors every week, either in group coaching calls or in individual clients or potential clients. And I would break it up the world right now in this way. About 25% of the churches and church leaders are really looking back, and they're saying, we want to get back to what we were doing and how we did it before the pandemic started. Let's all acknowledge that this is the first time that every pastor of this generation has been through a pandemic kind of season of this volume, magnitude, etc. I would say about half, and the biggest group, are just kind of stalled. It's like, we can't decide what we want. We know we can't really go back. We're not sure the way forward. We're going to try some stuff. And so that's to their, I'm cheering those that are at least going to try. But I would say 50% are kind of stalled with, we're just kind of stuck in the mud here right now. Yeah. And then finally, 25%, I think, are thinking forward and have set at least a tentative strategy that says, we're moving forward. We're planning for the new era and what that looks like for us. And they're trying stuff and trying to say, this is what we're going to be for the future. And it's, what that looks like, it looks different than the past.
Right.
Most often simpler, streamlined when it comes to their paths forward, and, putting it pretty focused. It's just a lot more focused.
Yeah. So you mentioned 50% of the churches that are kind of in this stalled space. And I mean, so as you walk with them, I mean, how do you, what are some practical ways to get unstalled, or is there?
Yeah, well, I think that what we have here are a couple things. So I think number one, the pastor has to be ready to move forward, and pastors are a little gun shy right now, to be honest. Yeah. 2020 was a battleground year in a lot of ways. Yeah. Between pandemic, protests, presidency races, things like that. And so getting your head out of the foxhole and getting shot at was not a fun thing.
No.
And so so first of all, the pastor has to be ready to move forward. And then, I work a lot with church boards. And I think that is one of the untapped resources that most churches have, is a robust board. And a lot of boards are just like, hey, yeah, we're willing to go, but we're not sure the people are ready to go yet. And so they kind of put the brakes on things. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that is what is happening.
Right.
And so part of the way forward is getting your leadership core on board to say, you know what, we're going to still be living in this season for another year. We might as well push on forward.
Mm, mm.
So part of it's a decision of will, and then part of it is, here again, a system. A lot of what I do is just, what's our next storyline?
Yeah.
What does our next story look like?
Yeah.
And let's begin writing that chapter, knowing that we're going to have some challenges, but might as well start writing it now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's helpful. So you said some of the boards are saying, hey, I don't think people are ready for that right now. And you say that's not a bad thing. Not necessarily a bad thing. So when is it? I mean, because we both know pastors that have gone hard charging, blew off the board, that said, hey, this isn't probably the right time right now. And sometimes they were right and lost the people in the process. Is there a time when being in this stalled space isn't necessarily a bad thing? You understand what I'm asking?
Oh, I know exactly what you're asking. In fact, I use this a lot in my succession planning. There was an author who is no longer with us, but his name was William Bridges, and he invented a change methodology, which is found in his book Transitions. And he says every successful transition has three distinct phases: endings, a neutral zone, and then new beginnings. And I think that a lot of churches, and that kind of describes the three buckets as well that I mentioned earlier, is you have people who are still in the ending phase, and they haven't kind of left that behind, and they haven't got to the neutral zone. The stalled space is a neutral zone. And if we say, look, let's try some things and let's navigate forward, that is one of the great advantages of a neutral zone, is the opportunity to try stuff and to innovate on some things. Before we can set a chapter that we will call the new beginning. So I don't think that's necessarily bad to be in a neutral zone. I think you have to start letting people grieve the things that are lost, but then to say, okay, this is where we are. We can't stay here. We've got to keep moving forward. It's akin to, and not to I'll use it as a metaphor, not as a spiritual concept. It's the children of Israel that left Egypt, got through the Red Sea, and now we're in the wilderness. And what did God do to his people in the wilderness? He refined them. He had them scout out the land. He had them, build a whole new culture before they could enter the new and promised land. I hear again, not to over spiritualize that story, but that's just a metaphor of some of what's going on.
And so maybe there's a piece of this where we need to really be leaning in and embracing the refining that comes from this weird in between before diving in wholeheartedly. That's helpful, I think. So we're talking new beginnings and all that kind of thing. I mean, what are you seeing on the horizon that's coming that we need to be thinking through?
Well, I will say, let me go back to one thing. What I did see during this season, and still seeing, and part of this was, certain churches, so it's not all churches, but those that had robust small groups before the pandemic tended to come through this extremely well. And by robust small groups, what I mean is ongoing groups that people were a part of and that stuck together through this season. I think also the second piece of that is those churches that kind of restarted small groups, even in the middle of the pandemic, or have restarted them since then, are getting that sense of momentum, because I think that's for relationally driven churches, and that's not all churches, mind you. But for relationally driven communities and churches, that was one of the pieces that was missing and was most missed in the pandemic. And so people looked for ways to get connected to that. I'm working with a mainline church right now that does the old idea, or fairly old idea, of supper clubs, where people sign up. It's like 3 to 6 couples, and weekly they get together, and it's at a home, and they share a meal and they talk. And they said that the signups for those have been phenomenal in this season. And those aren't traditional small groups, mind you. But and they didn't have really a sense of small groups before this. But they said, we've just found that people were just craving those kind of connections. And so I think there's some opportunities there. But on the horizon, let's go to horizons.
The horizon.
So there's a couple of societal trends or church trends that I think we need to be looking at. Number one, I think those churches that have looked to new constituencies more than old constituencies have done okay. And by new constituencies, I'm saying these are people that they tended to reach either during the pandemic or they said, hey, this is a great opportunity for us. So those who are thinking about new constituencies, not just their past constituency. And this goes back to the first thing I said, those churches that are looking backwards, we want to get back, are trying to think how to regather people that were already part of them. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying, we should focus more energy on what are our new constituencies that we need to reach.
Yeah.
I think the other big trend that I'm not sure how we're going to deal with it yet, and you guys have talked about this at Chemical Staffing, a lot of people are talking about this frame of the Great Resignation.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about the church side. I'm talking about church constituencies. If Gallup is right, 40% of Americans say they'll be working somewhere else this time next year or not working. That's an incredible societal shift. As people are devaluing their work, which has been one of the primary drivers of Americans, is what do you do for a living? And we have this whole social thinking now that is saying, you know what, it's not that important what I do for a living. Somewhat around a third of Americans now are able to work remotely. What does that mean for churches? Not for, and here again, I'm not talking about church staff. So what does that mean for our people? How do we reach them in new ways? Because they're not commuting to work. What does this mean? I read earlier today of the number of working mothers, whether married or not, that are exiting the workforce. Now it's still about, it's only about a third of working moms. And, that's a very narrow slice, really. I'm not saying this is every female, because, and my wife, who's a professional, is a working mom, but our kids are grown and out of the house. That's not what we mean by working mothers. We mean is those who have kids and still school age or younger. The church had to make massive adjustments when mothers entered the workforce in the 70s, 80s, as to what that program looks like. But now we have this exit from the workforce of many of these, here again, driven by their values of, do I just want to work all the time, or do I not want to burn out and do this? So not sure what the opportunities are, but I think there are opportunities there to reach those constituencies especially. So I think this Great Resignation season, I'm not sure how we leverage it, but I know it's a societal trend that's out there. We got to figure it out.
Oh, absolutely. And there's almost have the ability to begin to speak into identity questions in ways that we've just been waiting for years and years and years to do, I would imagine.
Yeah. I think the other horizon issues, by the way, I didn't look at it today or yesterday, but at the end of last month, there was more money in accounts. I'm talking checking, savings, liquid money accounts than ever before at Americans' accounts. Now, it's not evenly distributed. I want to make that clear. But the money is out there for giving and generosity initiatives from our people. We had record giving in 2020, of course. We could see it in 2021. I haven't seen as many churches kind of finding creative ways to ask for dollars from their people, but the money's there. It's in accounts. We just haven't necessarily tapped it. The final horizon issue I will mention, I think 2022 could be rough for pastors and churches, mainly because it's an election year again.
Oh, geez. Thanks for bringing that up.
Exactly. And I think that in some contexts, pastors are going to be really caught in the middle again. We still have pandemic issues we'll be dealing with. the political issues surrounding left, right, center, Democrat, Republican, red, blue, in certain contexts. Now, there are certain parts of the country where it's just not an issue.
Yeah.
But in places like where I live and where you live, for that matter, Matt,
Oh, yeah.
they will be issues. And there will be some, because of that, there will be other protests around certain social issues, rightly, wrongly.
Yeah.
They're going to happen because the outrage cycle will drive those to happen.
Yeah. So as you walk through this with the churches that you're working with, I mean, outside of, I guess the biggest thing right now that everybody's, yelling about is vaccines and vaccine mandates and all that kind of stuff. And we won't touch that. So, I mean, but it's cooled down a little bit. How are you counseling churches to prepare for that piece?
The
upcoming
yeah, sure.
The refiring up of the election cycle and all the outrage and hate that comes out of that. Because I mean, we got guys. I mean, you talk about the Great Resignation on the civilian side. I mean, the church side, we're seeing a lot of that with pastors that are going to sell real estate because it's just they're tired of being wrong on every decision they made over the last 18 months, and are licking their wounds from all that. So I mean, how are you coaching them to prepare for this joy?
So, and I'm seeing this not just in pastoral fields, but in other business leader fields. Get off social media now. Social media is not the right place for appropriate and good discourse and conversations. And I saw this not just with pastors, but with other influencers saying, you know what, I've decided I'm going to cut my Twitter feed or Facebook feed, or you fill in the blank of what your favorite TikTok, reels, whatever the one of the hour is, and said, hey, I'm only going to speak out and do a little bit of promotion for maybe a Sunday worship, or here's our next series. We are going to get off that bandwagon. I think the other thing I've seen a rise in, and I think this is healthy discourse, is when we're going to address some of these issues, we're going to do it in a podcast, and it's going to be a conversation. And we're not going to try and show all views or anything like that, but we're going to make it more conversational, and we're going to point people to those kinds of forums where we can have longer frame conversations, or we're going to take a bigger issue, we're going to break it up into chunks.
Yeah,
we're going to address people that way. We're not going to have we're not going to make that a focus of our ministry next year or in the past. So I think those that are using those types of tools to disciple and to pour into people, even though they may not have huge constituencies, they will draw those who are polarized one way or another, and hopefully help to counsel and disciple people in whatever direction that pastor leader tends to kind of lean in. And so that we can go depth with those conversations and not just hit surface and Twitter link feeds or Instagram kind of things. So I read a business leader the other day said, hey, I had to save my soul, their words, not mine. And they're not a pastor or Christian leader, anything like that, by resigning from Facebook and Twitter because it just became too toxic and drove me crazy. So I think those pastors and leaders that say, look, my image, I'm not going to use the image burnishing tool to promote myself to certain constituencies and feed the outrage and feed the cycle. Instead, I'm just going to get off and focus on what I think my work is as a pastor, however they choose to define that.
That makes sense. More of us got off social media in general, I think the whole world would be a healthier place, but I don't know. A comment like that might get us fired. So,
well, maybe so.
Well, Dave, this has been helpful. Tell me, as you're kind of looking around, what encouragement are you giving to pastors now as they lean into, this season and potentially, what sounds like another election season. Thanks for reminding us of that.
Well, I think here's the encouragement I have. First of all, for 2021, and I'm not sure when this will be distributed, but for 2021, we still have a huge opportunity to finish the year strong financially.
Okay.
I think it's too late to reprogram anything for 2021, but to finish the year financially strong, we have lots of opportunity. We should be casting vision and asking for gifts now to support next year.
Yep.
There are a few tax provisions this year that will probably not be available in 2022. And so for those where taxes are a consideration, which are fewer people than you think, about 15% of our givers.
Yeah.
But some of those can give large gifts to help support. Go ahead and ask for the funds now. At Generis, we do a lot of generosity initiatives. I don't do that kind of work, just to make people understand that.
Yeah.
But some of my colleagues do. And I think this is a great opportunity to finish the year strong financially.
Yeah.
We did not get, or most churches did not get extended. 2020 was helped by the PPP loans and some other financial support. We didn't have that this year. We are not going to have that next year, I don't think. So we might as well ask for giving now.
Yeah.
Next year can be better. We can begin to think here again, thinking in terms of those buckets, thinking in terms of those transition zones. I think now is the time to start moving people forward.
Yeah.
I think people are ready for a new story to be written in their personal life, their professional life, their social life, their congregational life. One of the things I didn't mention, but I think this can be an encouraging thing. I've heard for 20 years now that youth sports has taken over the social lives of teenagers and younger people and their parents. Youth sports are down about 40% overall.
Oh, wow.
If you look at the Aspen State of Play report that was written this year and last year, people aren't returning to sports.
Wow.
Parents aren't returning their kids to a lot of the organized sports. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing.
It's an opportunity, though.
It's an opportunity. It's a different thing. And what parents are saying are, you know what? We realized in the pandemic that we were spending way too much time on that type of activity.
Yeah.
There's still going to be a few that are in the elite sports category.
Right.
And they're going to be diehards. They're going to keep going with travel ball, travel dance, not just sports. It's those kind of extracurricular, heavily expensive, intensive activities for a certain segment of the population. However, the rest of the population, 80% of the people, they either weren't there or they're not going there, and even they're cutting back on their recreational kind of sports to spend more time with family and to say, what does it look like to support our family spiritually, developmentally, emotionally?
Yeah.
And how are we replacing that? So I think that's an encouragement for leaders to say, look, we're going to have some of our people that are driven by the sports culture, but not as many as we think.
Not nearly as many. And so how do we start to how do we start to fill in that identity hole too?
Exactly.
That's really helpful. I hadn't heard that, and that's fascinating to me. So Dave, thank you for that. Thanks for sharing that. And Dave, if you don't know, has a fantastic resource called Church Leader Insider that he puts out on a weekly basis. Short read, but filled with just helpful stats and studies that he's seeing that will significantly, I'm convinced, will significantly impact your ministry. And so we'll link off down below so you can sign up for that. And I promise it's not spam selling, Dave. It really is helpful insight on a weekly basis. So
I co-write that with my colleague Greg Liggett. I want to give Greg some props.
Oh yeah. So. Absolutely. So, well, Dave, thanks so much for the time, man. Really appreciate it.
Okay, Brad. Thank you.